So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. This is the TEEP, or Trusted Execution and Environment Provisioning Working Group. So if you were not expecting to be in the TEEP call, you can drop. So I've got my co-chair, Tiru, on with me. Let's go ahead and get started. This is a virtual interim meeting. The note well applies with respect to the policies and procedures. I think list everyone on the call has been in TEEP sessions before, so I will just leave it here and move forward. So for the agenda bashing, Jim has helped me get started with the Etherpad, which I've noted here, but I could really use another note taker. Can I have a volunteer, please? We cannot move forward until we do. Anyone? Yes, Soren? Kristen? Please?
About your co-chair.
Thiru?
Hey, I can take the notes, no problem.
Okay. Thanks. All right. So with that, we needed to bash the agenda here. I didn't have anybody meaning the authors of the TEEP protocol, volunteer to provide an update on that.
Actually, I sent you an email that I would like to discuss the issues and the beyonds.
When did you do that?
Today or yesterday?
Okay. I probably missed it.
No problem. I added it to the Etherpad, the link also to the beyonds.
Okay, good. So since I'm using the Acrobat, I will update it later. But Hannes, thank you. And we'll use whatever time we have left. So if you're okay, since I didn't have this at the time that I was posting this, so you must have sent it after 3 or 4 in the afternoon, my time. But anyway, so from the agenda, I moved it since I didn't know that you would be presenting. I moved you last. Is that okay? Or do you want me to move it back up and have the hackathon go last?
I think we will manage to go through all these items. I think we have enough time. So
okay. Well, I left it last just in case anyway. And so you could have the rest of the time since you'll be the last presenter.
Yep.
Cool. So anything else with respect to the agenda? If not, we can go ahead and get started. And Dave, I had you go first with the architecture.
Okay. Do you want me to project or do you have slides?
Nope, I have them.
Okay, great.
You are ready.
Okay, can you go into full screen?
I can't. I
Okay.
figured out how to have Acrobat go full screen.
Okay, that's fine. Let's go ahead and get started then. I'm talking about draft 08. Next slide. You guys can hear me okay? Audio is doing fine?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so our timeline, we had a interim meeting, if you remember, about 2 months ago. Right before that, draft 06 was posted. And February and the interim meeting, we had a number of discussions, then a little bit of follow-up on the list, which was about how do we resolve the working group last call comments. And so we resolved the remaining ones in draft 07 in March, taking into account the feedback from the virtual interim meeting. And since then, there have been no list discussion, but there have been 2 new issues filed since draft 07. So keep going. Previously, at the interim meeting, this was our proposed timeline. This is the same slide as from February interim meeting. This is not the current next steps, right? The plan was to post 07 before March 9th, which we did. And then the point is we agreed to do a second working group last call to be discussed at IETF 107, which of course didn't happen. And so we're at approximately that point in this timeline. Okay, So remember, our original goal was to progress the architecture document to .esg for publication by the end of April. And depending on how this goes, we may still be on track because we could have a second working group last call after this call. So go ahead. All right, so I'm going to walk through the issues that have been filed since '07. So the first one was feedback that came in from the Confidential Computing Consortium. If you remember at last face-to-face IETF, I gave a short slide deck on the introduction to the Confidential Computing Consortium, which is a body that hosts open source projects that are relevant to TEEs. And there was a piece of feedback that came in from them. And by the way, full disclosure, I am the chair of the Technical Advisory Council and the Confidential Computing Consortium. So part of my role is to provide feedback from the Confidential Computing Consortium to other technical bodies like you guys. So this was me as the messenger providing that feedback from that other body. And so this had to do with the definition of a TEE. So you can see in draft 07 to draft 08, there was a change made in two places in the document, the abstract and the introduction, which had the same text, about what the definition of a TEE was. And you can see this notion that only authorized code can execute within that environment was changed to any code within that environment cannot be tampered with. The main point was the draft 08, it's really about code integrity rather than allowing or disallowing code. If you think about how something like SGX works, right? You can run a bunch of different things, but they're isolated from each other and they're not tamperable. But whether you prevent execution or not is not really core to the point of there being a TEE. The point is that you can't tamper with the code. And so we made that change to align it with their recommendations because the editors also agreed. So unless there's any comments, we can go on to the next slide, just explaining what the change was and why. So next one. And the other one, so this is one of our AIST colleagues who often participates in, AIST folks participate in our hackathons and so on, had asked, why does the TEEP protocol need to support devices with no REE? Now, if you may remember issue number 139, you may remember that we discussed a similar thing recently in TEEP, sometime around the time of the last face-to-face at 106. And then it was 139, which was this contradiction about whether the device has to have a REE to use TEEP or not. And there was different places in the document that said one versus the other. There was a contradiction. In the February interim meeting, we then resolved that with an agreed resolution that it should be supported, but the Kuniyasu had asked, so I can't figure it out, when would that actually happen? And so the resolution was to add an example. And so that's the text in bold that appeared in draft 07, right? Example is a microcontroller, blah, blah, blah. If there's any comments, we can go on to the next slide.
It's probably
Two issues. Those are two issues that were filed since 07. Go ahead.
I think maybe the wording isn't ideal, but I think the issue, the case is like, while we have sort of focused on the case where we have the broker and it resides, sort of like we have the split between the broker and the RE and the client side in the DE. But of course, you could not have the broker, and it basically resides inside the trusted execution environment as well. I think that would be another possibility, but I think the text is good.
Thank you. Any other comments? And next slide. Okay, so this is another issue that was filed recently, and so this was Nikolai pointed out an omission that we had added a bunch of text about the security model and the trust model and the privacy issues and so on. And it covered DOS in some cases, but it did not mention that the broker or the rich execution environment or whatever could do DOS by dropping messages in between the TEEP agent and the TAM. Okay, and so that was never mentioned. It covered lots of other cases, but this case was not actually mentioned. And so the text in bold was added into two sections to do that. So in 9.1, which is the overall, broker trust model, where it talks about what the broker can and can't do and what what it still can do because it's not trusted, right? That's the whole point of the REE. The TEEP broker can still conduct DOS attacks as discussed in 9.3, right? 9.3 is the one that covered different types of attacks. So forward reference there. And then in 9.3, you can see in the middle there, the compromised RE may terminate the TEEP broker, such that the TEEP transactions cannot reach the TE, or might drop or delay messages between a TAM and a TEEP agent. Okay, so that was the nod that says, yep, that's another one in the list. And then the discussion after that is the same across the set of DOS attacks. Okay, so that was in draft 08. So before the ones were in draft 07. Now we're into the ones that were addressed in draft 08. So keep going. Unless there's any comments. One of the topics that came up for roughly for the first time at the February interim meeting was how often the TAM or the attestation service should be checked, right? So what's the frequency, how long are results valid, and so on. So we had this long discussion, which you can find in the minutes and the, can find notes about in the February interim minutes. And so the bottom two lines here are on the slide are the snippet from those actual minutes in Etherpad, right? Which was the outcome of that discussion was that we should file an issue in the RATS architecture document about how long an attestation results would be used. And Hank had pointed out during the interim here that we should, talk about there was always be some delay, and the evidence may have changed during the evaluation, right? There's no way around that, but we should point that out. But it's a dual issue between the TEEP architecture and the RATS architecture document, and so we need to coordinate between those two. And so continue on, because this is slide 1 of 3 on this topic. And so, by the way, Ming took the action item, thank you, Ming, of actually filing the issue as a result of the interim meeting. So what issue 148 is it was Ming posting it after the meeting, the discussion. All right, so the draft 07 partly addressed this. I mean, it had the first half of stuff. Okay. The first half of stuff is the part that coordinated with the RATS architecture. So the section in question here talks about malicious TAs, right? Because the whole topic was what happens when you're, out of compliance, something is bad, whether it's malicious or policy is changed or whatever. And so for the malicious case, you want to minimize how long you can be malicious for. And so the text in bold was added there, which talked about this is summarizing the point that Hank and others had made in the interim meeting, right? There is, however, a time window during which a malicious TA might be able to operate successfully, which is the validity time of the previous attestation result. For example, if the verifier in Figure 5 is updated to treat a previously valid TA as no longer trustworthy, any attestation result that previously generated saying that the TEA is valid will continue to be used until the attestation result expires. As such, the TAM's verifier should take into account the acceptable time window when generating attestation results. See RATS architecture for further discussion. So the point is the generic discussion should be in the RATS architecture document, and the text here in bold is the TEEP specific, how it applies to TEEP, right? What the mapping is between TAs and TAMs and so on, and the generic discussion in the RATS architecture. This is the first half, because this only talked about how long the validity was and how long the window lasted of vulnerability. Okay, and so you can see a pointer to the RATS architecture document issue that tracks the same issue on the RATS side. Okay. Next slide. So that was draft 07, which solved half of the issue, we think. The other half was in draft 08. So Ming had pointed out the question wasn't about how long an attestation result will be valid. The original question was how often some entity reaches out to reattest. Right? And so draft 08 is the one that talked about appended to the same one. That is, to recover, the TEEP agent must be able to reach out to the TAM. For example, whenever the request policy check API, which is already in section 61, is invoked by a timer or other event. Okay. So the point here is to say the time window is actually bound, the time window from a security purpose is bound by the duration of the attestation results. Okay. After that, you just can't do the authorized operations because your time window has expired per se. So how often you reach out depends on how fast you want to recover, right? You want to recover as soon as it expires. You want to recover more or less frequency. The point is the request policy check API in 621 already talks about having a timer associated with it. And so this just says by reference, it's probably that timer, but you could do something different. That's the or other event. You can see the quote from what is in 6.2.1 that it already said EG based on a timer there. So my belief as an editor is that the two things together in bold do incorporate the discussion we had at the February meeting to the extent that it needs to be covered in the TEEP document as opposed to the RATS architecture document. I'd love to hear anybody else's comments on how well you think we did here, and if there's other things we should keep in mind in the RATS architecture or in the TEEP architecture on this. If I don't hear anything, then we can go on, and I will assume silence is consent. Okay. Next, we can go back if we need to. Okay. I think Hannes couldn't make the February interim meeting, and so I carried this slide over from February to make sure that we have consensus. Although we did make a change in draft 08. So this original question was about whether personalization data requires confidentiality or whether there's anything that only needs integrity but might be device specific, by instance specific, meaning you have two different devices with TEEs, and the information you send to one is different from the information you send to the other, right? That's sort of the definition of personalization data, personalized to a particular device. Okay. Originally, before the February interim meeting, the text said personalization data must be encrypted. Other than that, there's no limitations. And so Hannes filed this PR about, well, maybe there's things that only need integrity. So maybe must should be may need to, right? So that was what the issue was filed. Okay, this is the slide. Other than the 1/3 in the title, it was the slide from the February meeting, which we discussed. But Hannes wasn't there, so continue on. We'll talk about what we did. Next slide. I'm going to go to 203. Okay. So this was some of the comments that led up to the discussion about, and we talked about this one a little bit in the February meeting as well, which was encryption support is needed, and it may be encrypted, doesn't enforce the recommendation to implement encryption, right? And so you can see as a requirement, the protocol must be able to support personalization data encryption. We then discussed that at the February interim, and you see comments in the Etherpad from the February minutes like this one, where Russ had said implementations must support encryption to allow for loading of sensitive personalization data, right? So the consensus in the February interim meeting was that the important point was to say that encryption support is mandatory to implement, right? Encryption implementations must support encryption. And the rest can be left up to the TEEP protocol document to say whether any particular message is actually encrypted or not. That doesn't have to be in the architecture per se, that could be in the TEEP protocol. So taking Russ's point or language here about implementations must support encryption, and Ming just above, that leads us to the last slide here, next one on this topic, is what we did in 08. You can see it used to say the personalization must be encrypted, and it now says, roughly based on Russ's language, implementations must support encryption of personalization data to blah, blah, blah. So the must be encrypted is replaced with must support encryption. And again, the point is
much better to me. I think
the main point is to move the rest of the discussion to the TEEP protocol document and just call out the security impact here.
Right, and I think that's something still for us to think about. Like when we talked about the personalization data in the past, and what we then said what we would do is we put it at the same. It's sort of data that also comes along with the manifest, and that's great. The confidentiality protection is supported there, so the new language fits in there. However, I still think that there is something for us to think about on the architecture side, not necessarily in the architecture document, but for the implementation of this with the protocol. Because imagine if the protocol runs to an implementation in let's say an ordinary trusted application, that maybe where the endpoint is inside the DE. And clearly, this is different from the actual application that will then use that data. So like the notion of end-to-end security, and specifically if you worry about who gets access to personalization data, I think makes me believe that in some cases it may be more desirable to actually have the trusted application then do whatever it needs to do to sort of encrypt that data or do something about it without involving the implementation of the end protocol endpoint. Does that make sense? Or do I need to sort of post drawing also?
Sounds like you have thoughts on what might go into the TEEP protocol document, but what I also thought I heard from you that you were fine with this in the architecture document and then continue the discussion in the TEEP protocol document, which was the intent of this issue. So.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, sounds good.
So since you have time for the TEEP protocol document, feel free to come up with something by the time you're up later. But
yeah. Okay.
This is me. I just note that comment that one. This is talk about like an implementation, right? Implementation in time side and in TEEP agent side. Right? TEEP agent side support the different kind of TS. Some TS may not need personal data encrypted. Some may, right? So then, as a provider, TEEP agent should have this capability.
But I would like to point out, and clearly this is a discussion for later. Is like, where are the endpoints for that encryption? Where does it start and where does it end? And the DE is not like the DE has multiple different places where things can be decrypted.
Yeah, that was the implementation.
But for the TEEP architecture, the assumption would be the TEEP agent and the TAM would be the endpoints of the encryption. Now, we've previously talked about cases where you might also have something where the payload itself is encrypted in secret from the TAM, and that's not what this is talking about, but that is also actually, no, I think we did add something somewhere else about that, maybe in the same section here, because we had this point about how you can have two different TAMs, one for personalization data and one for, say, the regular TA binary, for example. So I thought we actually added some text in a different issue somewhere.
But for example, Dave, even in your implementation, you run the code as a regular TA, not a TA with special privileges that implement the TEEP agent on the DE side. And there, if for example, if you do an update of another trusted application, then that update will be verified by code that is by keys that is elsewhere in the DE. Typically, code that runs at a much higher privileges in the DE. So I think even there, I believe there's a security qualitative difference. I think that also carries over to the personalization data.
I'm not sure I followed that, but if you're talking about a implementation, feel free to draw a picture, right? But what it sounds like everybody that's spoken up so far is really the question is, can we consider 132 as being, issue on the architecture document as being done and move the discussion to the TEEP protocol? So far, everybody that's spoken up has been in favor of that, even though there's more discussion on the protocol document. That's really the question I've asked is the changes that are made here sufficient that we've now addressed all the issues, right? That's what I'm trying to do. And that the goal of this slide deck is to verify whether draft 08 solves all of the issues close enough to be done with it and move the other discussion to the other documents, or are there changes that we still want in addition to what's in draft 08, right? That's the main goal of this particular presentation. So please speak up if you think that you want more changes than what we've done in the architecture document itself. All right, so I think this discussion will continue and we have time to talk about TEEP protocol stuff, whether it's in this call or after this call. So I guess next slide, Nancy, unless anybody else wants to speak up. Okay. So as you recall, the next steps after the interim meeting was to address those comments and then do a second working group last call. So based on the feedback that I've heard in this call so far, my my personal conclusion as an editor is that we are ready for a second working group last call, and so I'll hand that back to the chairs to decide whether they want to do that.
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, I haven't heard a lot of discussions. I also wanted to take a pause because I don't see any notes of the discussion that just ensued in the Etherpad. So, how you doing, Jim? If
Yeah,
you
I was
guys
just writing. Yeah, I'll paste that. I was writing in a notepad. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was expecting to see things going on the Etherpad. Okay. So that said, I think what I'd like to do is solicit volunteers to actually review the architecture document, because if I recall, we only had Nikolai and Thiru provide feedback. So can I get at least another volunteer, hopefully two, to help review this and ensure that we have more comments coming in the second working group last call? Wow, really? Nobody?
Daniel, what about you?
Yeah, Daniel, Mr. McGault, would you be able to review?
Okay, we'll do that.
This is Russ. I'll review it.
Thanks.
Yet another.
Okay. So we'll issue a working group last call for that as well. Okay, so with that, unless there's no other comments, let's move on to the next one. So Dave, that's you on the transport side.
That's the transport document. Okay, great. Thanks. So now we're on the TEEP over HTTP document. The file name still has OTRP in it, but that's because we did not want to change the file name at this point, because that'll go away once we eventually have an RFC. So keep going. This is TEEP over HTTP. Okay. So the timeline on this one was we did a working group last call. So IETF 106 was to do the changes talked about on IETF 106, then start a working group last call. That was then done in February, which the working group last call ended on February 26th, and we got 2 reviews. Thank you to Russ and Thiru in particular for those 2 reviews. Those were great. Also in April, Mark Nottingham did a recheck for conformance with the BCP 56 BIS. That's how to do protocols over HTTP document. He had done a review early on, and he did a re-review in April. So technically, we've had 3 reviews since working group last call started. So next slide. Okay, so the top list are things that were discussed at IETF 106, right? So 1, 2, and 4 were things that were addressed before then, and we just verified that they could be closed. 5 was one that we believed was done and wanted to get, well, actually 5 was one we had questions to the working group as to what to do. The outcome of that was to remove discussion, remove the TEEP over OTRP discussion from the document. Okay. So that was the outcome of the IETF 106 discussion. And then since working group last call was started, there was 4 new issues that came in, plus various pieces of editorial feedback from Russ and Thiru that didn't get issues filed. Issues were filed on all the main technical points. And if we missed some, the last slide on here calls out a couple other questions about are they actually technical issues or things that you want to bring up. So Russ and Thiru, please keep in mind if there's something that I don't call out here, please feel free to bring it up after the call or after the end of the other issues here. So we're going to walk through the ones that are on here, and then I got a slide on editorial feedback. So go ahead. Next slide. Okay. So number 8 was filed where Akira sent this question, but then in the issue itself, Akira and I commented, we said that this should be moved to the TEEP protocol rather than the transport spec. And so I think both of us, meaning the filer and the editor, both agree that this one can be closed. but I didn't go ahead and close it. We probably can because there's now a TEEP protocol issue. So I don't think there's anything to discuss here, given that everybody agrees that this was filed on a web document. So I'm just gonna go on. Number 11 is the call that the chairs put out about, JSON versus CBOR support and TEEP. And our understanding is the working group consensus was to use CBOR and not JSON, but all the examples in the product in the transport spec used TEEP plus JSON. And so number 11 was we updated the examples to use CBOR. Now, the actual content doesn't actually appear in the examples. It's just the media type appears in the HTTP header. And so the HTTP header, that's the content type and accept header, was changed from JSON to CBOR to match that consensus. And by the way, the actual value of the media type is normative in the TEEP protocol document, right? That's where the IANA considerations are that actually defines that. The transport document just says use the media type defined by your that you're using out of the protocol document, and so it's just an informative here. So you don't have to do any IANA considerations changes, just using examples because it points to the protocol spec. So that one was pretty easy. Next slide. Okay, so this one is an interesting discussion to see, are we on the right track? Did I do the right thing or not? So originally the question, Tiru in his review said, what kind of guidance do you have and what are the privacy and security implications if you do say, because it didn't say what version of TLS or what requirements are around which versions of TLS you support or you don't support or whatever. He said, well, what about if you're using TLS 1.2? What are the issues? Because, TLS 1.3 fixes some, and so do you need to call those out and so on. So I asked Mark Nottingham what they did with BCP 56 BIS, right, which is, again, the document that says how to write protocol documents that use HTTP as a transport. Right? And I noticed that document also didn't have such guidance. And so I asked him, so why is that? And he said in his email, he said, well, we in 56 BIS avoided this issue since it's not HTTP specific, right? We didn't think it was our job up at our layer to give that guidance either, right? And so that didn't really answer my question. So, however, what we found is that the security considerations, I think the types of things that Tiru is looking for are actually covered in BCP 195, right? Where BCP 195 is the RFC that gives the recommendations for what you should do around TLS and DTLS2, but the question here is TLS, right? So what are the recommendations, covers TLS versions and what you should and shouldn't do and all that kind of stuff. And so it already does that in a way that's not HTTP specific, right? And so what I've done in the transport spec is to add the bolded text, right? Which is after the point that it talks about TLS for the first time, right? The TLS certificates must be checked. To see BCP 195 for additional TLS recommendations, right? To say all of that applies as a BCP. The rationale for why I thought that this might be a good resolution is that document already has IETF consensus, so we don't have to spend lots of time arguing about what it might say. But then you can still say, well, what about all the TEEP specific stuff? Well, TEEP is secured end-to-end inside of HTTP, right? So in theory, there shouldn't be really anything significant that's TEEP specific to say, right? Because it's any TEEP specific security issue is the TEEP protocol's job to solve, not TLS job's protocol. So any of the TLS considerations shouldn't actually be TEEP specific. At least that's the claim. And so the belief is because TEEP is secured end to end, then all that's necessary, in my opinion, is to reference BCP 195 as the best current practice for what to do about TLS. So that's why I did that. So if anybody disagrees or thinks we need to say more in a way that's TEEP specific, now's your time to speak up and give some recommendations.
There's this other RFC that talks about the use of TLS for IoT devices, and maybe you could add reference to that too.
Okay, is that the one that's the TLS profile from Elliot? Okay.
Hey Dave, the text you're referring to in RFC 2818, I think it's pointing to an old mechanism for doing PKI's validation. So I think you need to point to the right document for doing certificate checks. 2818 is not the right reference.
This text is largely taken directly from BCP 56 bis. And so if you believe that that reference is not correct, you should also follow up with Mark Nottingham, because when he did his recheck, I asked him, do you believe that this is still saying the right thing? And he said, yep, still looks good to me, or still looks okay, I think was his exact quote.
Yeah, sure.
And so,
I'll inform him. Yeah.
if that one changes as well, I'm happy to make an equivalent change into here. But right now it says, document should say the following, and I'm saying the following. And so if I change it, then I'm out of conformance with that unless it changes also.
Sure.
So maybe we can start a thread with at least the three of us, if not the list or whatever, to just get him to confirm that. But since this is a change for the HTTP BIS working group, to change their recommendation as to what we should say, then I would like him to buy off on that. I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying I want to keep in sync with that other document.
Yeah, because PKS is discussed in 6125, which is an latest update, and I don't see the 2818 is not referring to that.
So if you'd like to propose a change either to here or to 56 bis, because the language is almost the same, and as long as the HTTP bis, as long as the editor of 56 bis, which is Mark, as long as he incorporates it into BCP 56 bis, then I'm happy to make exactly the same change here. So.
Sure.
Okay, so you have an action item to follow up on, and I will happily go along as soon as Mark at least acknowledges that he will put it into there. If he pushes back in any reason, then I think we should hold off and figure it out. I don't imagine he'll push back, but we'll see. So, okay. Anyone else?
That both of them should be referenced.
Say that again, Russ.
I think both documents should be referenced here, 2818 and 6125.
Yeah, that might be the simplest fix. Is just Russ, your suggestions right before the period to say and RFC, whatever that number was. Is that right? Is that your suggestion?
Actually, what we could use reference to 6125.
Yep.
I think that would be better. Just replacing the reference to 2818.
I think you want them both, Hannes.
That's fine for me too.
So if I remember right, HTTP BIS working group owns the particular BCP 56 BIS, and they are not under the security area. So if we have a recommendation, they're not under the security area. If we have a recommendation, they ought to go along with it. So like if people say, Russ and Tiro and all of us had this conversation in the interim meeting, feel free to check our minutes here, but our recommendation is to change your 56 BIS to the following, then that would be a security working group recommendation to a non-security working group. Okay, well, hopefully somebody can capture that RFC number in the Etherpad, because I've now forgotten what it was. So.
Yeah, I've captured that.
Okay, great, thank you. All right.
Abhidev, one comment was that RFC 6125 just talks about PKI-based certificate validation. I think the architecture draft talks about self-signed certificates and others. So do you want to refer to some of the specification for those TLS certificates to be validation? 6125 does not cover self-signed certificates or private CA.
What does 2818?
I don't think so, because HTTPS does not typically discuss private CA.
I'm not sure that really matters.
Right. I don't think what's typical is important. I think since the 56 bis is talking about guidance for people using HTTP as a transport, it doesn't mean people typically that use HTTP as a transport in typical situations. I'm saying 56 bis should cover the wide range of stuff, including IoT and so on.
Yeah, I didn't see anything in
TLS. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like Tiro, you currently have the action item on this one, and I will happily make a change as soon as we can get to it. So I just want to make sure we have agreement on who's got the next step here, and I will wait for you. But if we can get that done quickly, that would be awesome.
So Dave, technically you're out of time, but I'll give you a few more minutes given that.
Okay, are we actually pressed for time on the call? I thought you told me that we were not as pressed for time, but I'm happy to take.
Yeah, well, that's because we didn't have the TEEP protocol, but
Okay.
I think we're going to be fine. So keep moving.
We have another, if I remember
Hey,
right.
Dave, the other comment that I see is the conditional use of HTTPS. I think even Ben had the same comment that I had posted in the
I have
working
that
group.
on the later slide. I have that on a later slide, so I want to get to that.
Sure.
So Nancy, time check. My understanding is we've gone for 45 minutes, and I thought that the invitation was 2 hours. Is that not correct?
Yeah. Which is why I said I think we've got time. So
Yeah, we've got an hour and 15 minutes. So okay.
I did not account for Hannes, so
Yeah.
but
Okay.
you've got time.
Okay, great. So the next one was about TAM certificate caching. The OTRP, the history was the OTRP spec did have text in there that talks about caching the TAM certificate. So the TEEP agent could learn the TAM certificate, cache it, and so when it needed to reach out to the TAM, it could immediately encrypt with the TAM's public key without having to ask for a round trip to actually go and fetch it again. Right, that was what the caching was for. The TEEP spec does not yet have any discussion about caching, right? Because the TEEP spec is much newer. Rather than passing the certificate directly, again, this is my understanding of how OCSP data works. Somebody will correct me if I have this wrong. The TEEP spec uses OCSP data. The OCSP data contains certs. One of those certs would be the TAMS cert, but it doesn't mention yet caching yet, right? That's issue 17 that was filed in the TEEP protocol. So here's the change that I made, and hopefully I didn't get this wrong, but somebody I'm sure will correct me if I did. So it now references if it's already had a cached TAM OCSP data that it trusts based on a previous query request. Okay, so it basically, without being able to reference a section yet, it references what the actual field is that would carry the stuff and what the message that it would be in. That's the closest that I can do right now without having that discussion in the TEEP protocol spec. So again, the intent is that you should be able to cache the TAM's OCSP data so that you have its public key so that you can encrypt the message to the TAM by sending a query response without having received a query request for it. This is the very first query request, query response exchange. You can skip the initial connect, get back the same query request it would send to everybody, and just immediately send the query response that you would have sent had that happened. If there's no questions, I will assume I got it right and go on. The only change that I would make if there was a TEEP protocol discussion is to add actually a reference to a section number in the TEEP protocol spec, which we could do once we have a TEEP protocol. But I don't think it's necessary. I think it would be helpful. All right. So here's the other, here's the things that are not sort of open questions. These are the trivial editorial ones. I have one more slide after this one. So we added a note about user agent strings being implementation specific. That was in response to Russ about the foo and bar and what the meaning of those are. The second one was to add an informative reference for quick because it's used in a diagram to illustrate where the broker boundary can be between the REE and the TE. And Tiru pointed out about the notes in there about firewalls would also apply to NATs, and so he said, and NATs. And so those are all editorial. I don't think they need to be discussed unless Russ or Tiru want to reopen them, because I think those are just editorial. So let's go on to the last slide, which calls out, I think it's the last slide. I think I put them all the same. Okay, here's the three possibly open questions. These are things that were asked that I gave an answer for, but I don't know whether we have consensus on there. And so the first one is about the use of the discussion around using HTTP as opposed to HTTPS. Okay, and so we've had a bunch of discussion about this in the past. The main technical answer for allowing HTTP without TLS is if you have constrained devices that use TEEP, since that's end-to-end secure inside by using COSE, right? And if they don't have the code space or whatever else to put in a TLS implementation, then they could still use TEEP, right? Because it's already secured inside. You'd introduce a couple of extra DOS and so on issues, but it's still, the TEEP part itself is secure. The secondary answer is for debugging, and I heard a couple people, Ben and I forget who else, has said, well, maybe we should remove the discussion of debugging because it's in there in a sentence. And so what do you guys think on this one?
Yeah, I think if it's just for debugging, I don't think it should be discussed in the protocol specification. Debugging, people can do whatever they want, but it does not make sense in the specification document.
Yeah, This means I agree. I think maybe we don't have to mention this one, but I think maybe answer is good, right? So it's because TEEP itself define product level E2E. So transport security is not that mandatory. So why the HTTP is open?
Yeah, so I understand the proposal from Tiru and seconded by Ben is to just remove the phrase that talks about N for debugging and only leave mention of the first case.
I would say first case is okay. Enough.
Okay. And unless there's any other counter proposals, I'm going to assume that is direction to the editors. If you'd like to speak up to say you want some other direction, let me know. But otherwise, I will take that as the direction to the editor. Okay. Second question raised was, and I think this came out of Tiru, your review, was should we actually specify what the HTTP error codes are, right? Right now, the text just basically says use an appropriate HTTP error code. So, your 200 level, 400 level, 500 level, whatever, use an appropriate one and figure it out. And so I'd asked Mark Nottingham, hey, if you're 56-bit stuff, what do you think the protocol should do with respect to specifying HTTP error codes, right? And his response was, what you don't want is you don't want the receiver to have like a switch statement on a particular code, to rely on there being, a 404 versus, a 50, whatever. So the receiver should only base behavior on whether it's 200 level, 400 level, or 500 level. So you have to be careful to not over specify things in a way that would cause receivers, because the actual error codes themselves within the 200, 400, 500 level might vary greatly by implementation. Okay. And so Mark's comment was he thought that the text looked okay as it was, but I didn't put that as a resolve here. I want to ask that and get any discussion here is now that I've forwarded Mark's response to the list, right? So with his permission, the question is there anything more specific that we want to do here, or are we okay with the current answer to the question, because it wasn't a request for change, it was a question? I'll ask Tiru first. If you've heard this and seen what Mark said, do you believe we should do something, or is your question sufficiently answered?
Yeah, I like the Mark's suggestion of returning the error codes from the server, but not specifying the client behavior. That seems like a good way of at least saying what the server should do, at least defining the server.
There's no specific things we can say, use this specific error in response to this particular thing, right? The 200 is success, and the 400 and 500 have specific meanings about internal server error or temporary or whatever, but I couldn't think of anything we could say that implementations would need to do, or anything that was tied to a particular event in the TEEP protocol.
And I think one important aspect is that most of the error codes, when they happen at the TEEP level, they actually don't populate down. So it may be, if you have an error at the TEEP level, it may still be a 200 okay, but then it's an error at the TEEP level. I think that's also what an important point the HTTP bits or the HTTP PCP document says, that you are not supposed to dictate the error code that the application, from the application down to the HTTP layer.
Right. Right now, my proposal is to do nothing here other than maybe keep discussing it or whatever, but I can't think of any change that actually makes sense in the document yet. If somebody else would like to propose one, feel free. But right now, I've thought about this, and after my discussion with Mark and so on, I don't think there's any change that I could make that that would make sense. So, okay, well, I'll let people think about that one. The last question that I have on my slides here is, and I don't remember who asked this, and if it was Hugh or Ben or somebody, why is 56 bits an informative reference? And the short version is, well, it's not used in any normative statement, right? It's used in security considerations, where it says for other security considerations, see 56 bits, right? The security considerations are extremely relevant. And so I can only imagine three possibilities. And right now, my opinion is we're taking the right one, which is don't reference 56 bits at all, okay? Where I think that would be a problem because we'd have to copy in all the security considerations that are in 56 bits. There's do what we're doing now is informative reference, and there's make it be normative, and then I'd have to have a normative statement that references it. And right now, my opinion is we're doing the right thing of making it be informative. So that was a question, and I'm hoping I didn't file an issue because it was a question. So, and this is my last slide. So, if there are things that are not on here that you, Russ or Tiro, brought up in your review that we have not talked about that you want to talk about, this is your last chance on the call here. Otherwise, it would have to be on the list.
This is Russ. I'm okay.
Thank you, Russ.
I think this pretty much covers all my comments. Thanks.
All right, great. Then, so do I have a next steps question on here? Or was that the last slide, Nancy? Okay. So the next steps, I got direction on the debugging one, and if Tiru gets a change on the TLS considerations one, I can do that. And so right now I'm expecting right now that I would push another one, although if we can get a alignment with 56 bis soon, then I'd like to get both of those changes into the same document. And then I will leave it to the chairs as to whether we need another working group last call or not after that, given that we had, what, 3 reviews since working group last call was started.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I had not counted Mark as an official review. So he's going to put Ming on the spot. Ming, would you mind reviewing it? And
Yes, actually, I
Do that too. This is Hannes. And I submitted the PR for the TLS issue a few minutes ago.
perfect. So if you guys can do that and provide feedback, I guess if you can, because Dave, you might need to do some of the smaller editorial notes too, for another rev.
I can do another rev as soon as we can close on the other ones, whether it's, this week or whatever. So it's
Right. So anyway, if we can get that done, then what I would want to do is just confirm that everybody's okay with that latest version after Ming and Hannes have also provided comments or reviewed. And then hopefully we can go to publication.
So do you want Ming and Hannes to review the draft 06 that's out right now, or do you want to wait for some? Okay, just making sure you're doing that in parallel. So,
Yes.
sounds good.
Was that clear, Ming and Hannes? Just wait until.
Yes, I waited for David's latest update and then review the latest grid.
So just a second. You wanted them to review 06 that's out right now, or a future one that hasn't been posted yet? Which was the one that you're asking them to review?
The future one that hasn't been posted yet.
Okay.
Yeah, extend the future. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so with that, Kira, you're up next.
Yeah, is my mic working?
Yes.
Thanks. This is about a report about having a virtual hackathon, and the reason of having a hackathon was to make a feedback reflecting from the implementation to the draft. So yes, and initially we were planning to just have a physical hackathon in Japan when the announcement was decided to cancel IETF 107. But later, even in Japan, meeting in face-to-face in the meeting room was started to be prohibited in many organizations. So we end up having a virtual hackathon in Japan time zone. Yes, next page, please. Yes. So yeah, so we had a virtual hackathon in Japan time, and so pretty much that's what it is here. Yes. Next page, please. I don't think I'm going to spend 25 minutes. Well,
It's fine.
yeah. So since the hackathon in Berlin, TEEP is going to have only CBOR represented format. Still, query response and trusted application install and trusted application delete sequence is the same. So we wanted to have at least all 1.3 working. And we also wanted to start CBOR implementation starting. And also, my initial prototype was on ARM, and we should have been working on RISC-V, but not much yet. And so we wanted to work on SGX, and not not all in Japan was uh, thinking it's TEEP draft is able to applicable on SGX. So yeah, we just wanted to confirm it's going to be fine or not. Next page, please. Yes, yes, and the 10 attendees, even and from day further from yes, from is it Seattle? Yeah, time zone. So it's probably it was 11 o'clock midnight in his time. And most of the other members people who've been attending to IETF in the past or hackathon in Berlin. Thank you for all 10 people attendees. This was my first time to hosting hackathon and first time to becoming as a virtual hackathon. So yes, thank you. And next page, please. And to prepare the virtual hackathon, yes, thank you for Secom to hosting video conference system. VCube is almost identical as a WebEx, and also we Robok provided the IP router, so I set up the L2TP IPsec. So TAM server and device will be able to connect inside that VPN and not to harm any public internet with the buggy packets. Yes. And it worked perfectly. Slightly had a disconnection on VPN, but yeah, other than that, it worked perfectly. Next slide, please. Yes. So this is what happened at the hackathon. So we never really finished with even the 3 sequences in JSON format. So we finished it, confirmed it was working with Isobe-san's TAM server and my device, and now from the virtual hackathon until today, I was able to focus on CBOR format. So that was good. It helped a lot. And CBOR format, during the virtual hackathon, didn't finish implementing making message in CBOR format, but we started to prepare the library in the header description of binary decoding and binary representation in the code. And Takita-san was already working on the libc library. So it was really helpful from his expertise to teaching other people about the CBOR message. Thank you. And next page, please. Yes, and another team was there wasn't much people was able to build a SGX TAM server by Dave. So Oi-san was only the person who was able to build a TAM server in the device. So and taught everybody else how to do the same. And then we started to try connecting TAM server and device inside the VPN. Yes. And Dave, thank you staying up here late for hosting your TAM server. And next page, please. Yes. So CBOR representation, or what do you call CDDL format in the draft. Yes, when we started the implementation, we saw some places we could use the text or binary strings inside a message to reduce the size because CBOR meant to be smaller binary format than ASN1 or other formats. So, and that's what I've been working after virtual hackathon until today, and few email on the mailing list today. And probably that's going to be the discussion on the next topic from Hannes. And also, yes, people in Japan was calmed down. Yeah, TEEP could work on SGX. So yes, that was personally good for me. Yes. Next page, please. Yes. Yeah, hackathon works on virtually. Yes. Yeah. And also it helps a lot having a video and text chat and VPN. And one thing I noticed was face-to-face hackathon is directly talking each other, but virtual one we use a lot of text chat. We use one of the chat tools we had on side was Slack, and it was text chat is also good. Technical discussion is able to read and copy and paste on your machine, which is good, which is nice. Yes. Yes, and next page, please. Yes. Yeah, this is the summary. So thank you, and yeah, and then I have after the virtual hackathon, I pretty much have a clear idea how the CBOR format and binary file works. So yes, I'm going to start more pull requests on the GitHub for the CBOR message, and also I have before making a CBOR discussion on the mailing mix, I was half doing converting TEEP protocol XML file to Markdown file, but I didn't finish it. So I might finish it sometime, not tomorrow, but maybe next week or yes, sometime. And for me, editing Markdown file is easier than XML file. Yes. Okay, that's about it. Any question?
I
Are
think
you
that was,
aware?
go ahead.
Are you aware that I have a tool for doing the XML to Markdown conversion? So maybe you can just send me the XML and I do it for you.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Yes. I pretty much finished on the only few things remaining is the chart. It was still written in the XML inside. But yes.
Okay.
Okay. Oh.
Well, this sounds pretty cool. So, any other issues, lessons learned that came out from the hackathon? Kira or Dave?
Yes.
No, I thought that the use of a VPN actually worked well, so that we could test things that might want to be on the subnet and so on was really not a problem. So I thought the use of VPN was great.
Yes. VPN will provide having all the TAM and devices for all the hackathon attendees machine in the same segment. The problem is the VPN is encrypted with IPsec, so it's going through video conference packet through VPN won't work well. So most of the people end up having two machines, and one for development machine and one for hosting video conference machine.
Yeah, that's true. I think that had to do with how the routing was set up, so that because all that would have been necessary minimally, if we're going to do it again in the future, is if the VPN has no default route, right? Because we were always using unlink addresses to talk to each other, right? And so that meant that whenever we were trying to get out to the internet, then the default route was going across there. I think that was the real problem. If I was going to do this in the future, I would try to set up a VPN and figure out a way to configure it so that there was no default route.
Mm.
I'll try. Yes. And
Very
also,
good.
IPsec L2 L2TP IPsec works well with all different machines, Windows, Mac, Ubuntu, Linux, Fedora, whatever. Only my setup was using NAT to have everybody in the same segment, and had to change one line in the register in Windows. So if Windows in the future, if they if it falls back to NAT traversal mode, it will be nice, but it's all right.
So do you have another hackathon planned, Akira?
So yes, we had a discussion having a hackathon locally, physically in Japan. Right now, situation is getting more intense in Tokyo. Probably it might have a lockdown in Tokyo in this or next week. But after that, if things calms down, yes, definitely
meant
sometime.
virtual, yeah, because I think
We
the
also had
US
this we had this plan for the IETF hackathon, which unfortunately was demolished by Charles and so on, because we spent some time setting that one up. So I think it would be worthwhile to schedule another virtual hackathon, whether some people are grouped together locally, physically, or not. I think that should be fine in both ways.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
for
I
me-
mean, Charles was willing to do the virtual, by the way. It was just,
I understand. I'm not blaming him, but it was just unfortunate because,
yes. Yes. Okay.
Great. For me, having a virtual hackathon and working on Seaboard, for my great achievement was I was able to use my old expertise when I was junior high school or high school, reading the documentation of the TEEP protocol and writing down how the binary should work by reading, and then changing the binary to converting the CDDR format. Yeah, it took me a whole week, last 1 week, but it was fun.
Okay. Well, let me know if you guys want to host another virtual hackathon. We can see what we can do. All right. Thank you, Akira. Okay, so with that, let's see. We have, I think, 48 minutes, if my math is right. I might be 10 minutes off. Hannes.
Could you open the pull request and
share?
And the issue list?
I just posted the link in the WebEx chat in case anybody wants to open it themselves.
Okay, which one did you want me to, oh, it helps if I share. 1 second. Okay, can you see my browser sharing the
Yeah, it works.
the issues? And I
Yeah.
toggle back and forth between the issues and the pull requests. I see
Okay.
pull requests. Yeah.
Start with the pull request. I think that's easier. Then we jump over to the issues.
Okay.
So the first one, number 14, which was actually came out. We had a discussion maybe on the list. Well, we had that one on the list. The integer for the token, and there the issue was initially that there was this question about the nonce, which we used in context of the work done in rats with the entity attestation token, which allows the dam to, as a demonstration of liveness, send the nonce over to the device, and then the device returns the token back, the E token, which includes then the nonce. So we clarified that one on the list, that this nonce needs to be relatively long, so there's some indications on how long that's supposed to be in the EAT specification, and if we just use the same length, then we won't have any issues. But then the topic of like, what about the token? The token is used, and that's a different element in the protocol, is used to match the request against the response, or to the response. And so that's an I think it was previously a byte string, and the suggestion was to make it an integer. I was actually wondering why an integer. We could actually make it an unsigned integer, but in general, like an integer is the right thing to do. And I also stumbled over it when I sort of converted my JSON-based implementation to CBOR. So I think.
Nancy, can you can you zoom it all in your browser window? Because the font is a little small. So Hannes, can you refresh our memories? What's the difference between the use of the token versus the nonce? In other words, given that you have a nonce, what is the token used for that the nonce doesn't already provide? If you can refresh our memory.
Yeah, the nonce is purely for the attestation information, goes into the attestation. Then, and if you don't request attestation, which is actually an option as well, then you wouldn't send a nonce. The token is used to.
Is the nonce generated by the TAM?
Yes. So the DAM creates the token as well as the nonce in both cases, and but in case of the token, it sends the token or puts a number in there, and the
nonce in a TEEP message as opposed to inside a RATS formatted. There's
no RATS formatted message.
Okay, so as long as the nonce is in the TEEP message, why do you need both a nonce and a token as opposed to only using one of the two?
Because they are used for a different purpose, and the nonce shows up only in one message, and the token shows up in every message.
So I guess the question I'm asking is why not put the nonce in every message is really the question I'm asking, and get rid of the token. That's what I'm asking is what's the difference in purpose? The
difference, the nonce is for the is in the query request. The DAM sends it to the client, and if it wants to get an attestation entity attestation token back, and then that nonce would in the response would not show up in the TEEP message, but it would instead be included in the EAT message as one of the claims. That's
having a token in the TEEP protocol is very handy for the implementation, because token is able to use as a sequence of the message. So if one message from TAM and the reply is going to be from a device, then it's just going to have incrementing the token number. It's probably the most use cases, and that will be easy to track if the packet have lost, or it's the packet is not received, we're just waiting, or just the next packet came again.
Or if the device has multiple DEs and you send out multiple requests, you need to match the request or correlate the response to the request. That's why there's. So
I was like curious to hear. So, comment on the sequence number. Would that potentially have some issue? But you want the people guess it?
There's no sequence number. The token is just a number. It doesn't need to be in sequence.
Doesn't have to be a sequence. Yes.
Right. You
have to be a sequence.
Sequence, and the token is used because you can have multiple outstanding requests at the same time. Is that right?
Actually,
it's all over a right now anyway, it's all over a transport session that provides serialization. So you only need this if you actually have multiple outstanding query requests.
But remember that we also support devices with multiple TEs. There's no reason why you wouldn't send multiple requests at the same time.
Different TEs, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Agree.
And like lengthwise, that's also a huge difference. So I recommended to use unsigned integer, and I saw Carsten also sort of in the belief that this is better. There's yeah.
I highly prefer unsigned int, yes.
Mm.
Or, easier for computer language to match in binary integer than the string.
Mm.
Like string, yes.
I think what I would recommend is to sort of change this pull request from int to unsigned int, and then merge it into the protocol. I think that's good. But there will be more changes later with in one of the issues that Akira raised on sort of fine tuning the CDDL. So we can talk more about this aspect or these type of changes. There would be some work.
Yeah, I would still like, I think you answered my question earlier about why is there both. I'd like to see some text in the document, and I know that you added me as a co-author, and so I may help to author that text. But when I was talking about rets formatted, you actually answered that by saying the nonce is in the rets formatted, which is each, right? Just for, not everyone in the call necessarily knows that it's each, but when you say rets formatted, I just mean each, right? So the nonce comes back in the query response to each, and I think we just need some text in there to explain why both of them are in there. So.
I thought that I added some text, but I'm sure there's room for improvement here. Yeah.
Great.
Mm.
Great.
I don't think it came across, Hannah, so.
Apparently not. So I need to improve that. Yeah. And I will make a proposal and see how you guys like it. Mm-hmm.
Add a comment here. Remember, I saw the email discovered nonce, right? What they should be integer on the, or it's how many bytes, right? 4 bytes, 8 bytes.
That's a separate issue.
Yeah.
It's not in the pull request. I think it's in the issues
It's
list.
not in this pull request, no. Yeah. Okay. Next pull request.
This one, adding text.
Yeah. So I since I was working on the implementation, I thought that we need a little bit more text about creating and verifying the TEEP messages, and so I created a pull request to do that. So if you go to the files changed tab, or whatever it is, yeah, scroll down a little bit. So it's I made some changes here, not so relevant. Yeah, actually, that's something I want to bring up. So previously, this goes back a little bit to earlier work where we actually allowed in signing and digital signatures and MACs, but so far, issue was that we only had talked about in the architecture document, at least, talked about digital signatures and not MAC. And so I sort of stripped that out, and specifically to focus only on COSI sign one, on the COSI sign one signature, which is, as you know, for one signer. I think we should be very explicit about what functionality we want to support, because COSI is kind of a broad toolbox, and we shouldn't just wrap everything in, because after all, this code will go into the trusted computing base, so we better be a little bit selective. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has some thoughts about this. Maybe you guys have some use cases, for example, for the regular COSI sign, which allows you to include multiple signatures, for example, would allow you to sign with multiple algorithms. But I don't see that that's an issue here.
Yeah, even in the suit manifest, it has the same member all these 4 different tags, but
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Right, but suit does have cases. Suit does have cases where you have countersignings, right? Because the author of the suit manifest and the TAM and many other entities besides just those 2. But here, if messages are just coming from the TAM to the TEEP agent, then maybe you don't need countersigning, which is, I think, what Han is asking.
yes. And what I was trying to say is, even in the suit manifest, it's how to present this in the binary format was not clear in the suit manifest. So C core, yeah, these 4 tag was defined as any, so it doesn't know which going to be binary string, byte string, or number, or yes. So yeah, so deleting from TEEP protocol is perfectly fine for me.
So Akira, if you have any feedback on the suit manifest document, can I ask that you either send it to Brendan or post it in the suit list?
Okay, yes, I will.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'm.
So Hannes, this is Russ. I agree. I think the signature makes a lot more sense since you expect the same code to be delivered to multiple T's.
You think that the cozy sign 1 is good?
I don't care between sign and sign 1. Jim's
Okay.
probably a better person to comment on that. I'm saying I like the signature more than the Mac.
Okay. Yeah, and I think if that's my proposal. Of course, maybe there's someone else has some specific use case and some ideas, then we should discuss it, or maybe have it a new version or so. Okay. Anyway, if you scroll down a little bit.
That's what you added, right?
Say again.
The green is what you're trying to add.
Yeah, exactly. So I added tags for both adding and verifying, and it's kind of obvious in some sense, but what it essentially says is, like, it talks about the cozy sign, it talks about populating the headers according to the cozy specification, and of course the content of the message, or not obvious, but the content of the message goes into the sign payload. There are different options that cozy offers, and I'm basically choosing one here, and there's also I'm using a CBORD tag to indicate that this is a TEEP message. There's also a possibility to use that indication elsewhere, but I thought that that's kind of a sensible approach.
What does line 262 mean when it says if the TEEP message is signed?
Yeah, so there I was a little unclear whether, for example, an error message, I wasn't quite sure how to best treat the error message, or whether the error message, there could be cases where the TEEP message is not, an error message is not signed.
I think we should explicitly disallow that and force all messages to be signed. I think we talked about this in the context of the OTRP protocol, and that was the conclusion. I don't think we should be any weaker in the TEEP protocol.
Okay, then I will change that. Yeah.
I think at the Berlin hackathon, I think there was also a question that we answered during the hackathon about that Akira and folks asked, which was, are TEEP messages, when they get put in a cozy, are they signed and then encrypted, or is it encrypted and then signed? And I think it is answered, but I think in the section here on creating a TEEP message, I think the wording could be clearer about what the relationship is to encryption, what that happens just in terms of the text.
So at the moment, like, there's only signatures, and there's no encryption here in that sense at this level. So
there has to be encryption at some level, right?
There is.
It's the whole point of the personalization data discussion.
Right. That would be at least that's what we said previously. Of course, we can always change our mind, but it was at the level of what the suit manifest and the sort of data that comes along with it would be there. So that's the place where the encryption would go, but currently the text doesn't talk about this, and I think obviously it should.
I think it has to. One of the OTRP, so Ming help me out here, but one of the discussions that I believe that we had around OTRP was that, say, the query response equivalent that comes back gets encrypted with the TAM's public key, such that the information coming out of the TEE can't be decrypted by anybody other than the TAM, right? And that's the type of stuff that we want to use the COSE objects encryption for.
Yeah, we'll need to add that. So I will. So, but this at the moment just talks about those sort of basic deep message processing and doesn't cover yet the other things that we're just talking about.
In a separate PR issue, whatever, I'm just saying that's what
Yeah,
I see as the gaps in this
it would
touch
be
here,
cleaner.
because this is the section on creating a TEEP message that I think would have such a discussion. So.
Have that right mutual well equip using mutual public key there.
I'll change that. Okay. This issue done. So if you guys have some comments on this, I will change take the comments that were previously brought up into account on the signing. Always yes.
Small comment. When I look at here, I just noticed that I use the word TEEP with a lowercase EEP. Maybe crop out. Do we use all uppercase?
Do we always use uppercase?
Yeah, and that's a document. I believe architect document others. Maybe you said
okay.
EEP.
I think consistently they've all been caps.
All caps because it's not like the new terminology to us. TEEP.
Okay, I align that too.
Yeah.
I didn't pay that. Okay. Okay. Next PR.
Where was I? I lost track of where I was.
This is, yeah. Right. I noticed that's a little bit embarrassing. Of course, I noticed when working. Okay. So maybe those are not keyboard tags, but they or keys or whatever you want to call them, but they end up so the protocol, so the way the protocol messages are currently defined, it's using a map, and for each of the keys in the map, you have to essentially define a number for them or whatever you want, so that it maps to the value. And so far, that was missing from the document. So it seems that maybe the term key is the right term, name key, and then there's also the data type related to that item. So if you can again go to files change, you will see what I actually mean by this.
The key is definitely the right term in a CBOR context. Okay. Of course, in the context security context, that can be very confusing.
Yeah, it can be confusing.
So COSI, for instance, uses the term label for that.
Label. Okay. Okay. Then I'll change it to label. If you go down, this is another change that I probably should not have made here, but it's okay. This is the real item. So, for example, you see there's a type sort of field in the message that we talked about, token, request, etc., nonce, and then and each of them needs to have sort of this field in this map, and so we can associate that. And I'm obviously suggesting to add that to the document to make the whole specification implementable. I think I looked at, it was the CWD on what we did there. That's sort of kind of where I copied it. And yeah, all of the fields are there.
So we really need this tag number. Map, CBOR. If we don't use number, it's going to be byte string. So the long label name is going to be consume a lot of bytes instead of 1 byte number. So
Yeah, that was definitely not my intention. I don't think that makes any sense at all. Yeah.
So I'm not the CPOR expert, but I thought that, so I'm looking at line 558, the type. Isn't that present in every possible message? Why does that have to be inside the map?
So you can choose whether you use an array, or you can use a map. Of course, you can combine things if you want, if you think that there's a benefit. And so the way it's currently written is that the whole thing is a map. This is quite useful when you have many optional elements or if you have many optional elements in a message. And so that's what I had.
The question I'm asking is, if there are fields that are not optional, and like type is the one that jumps out at me, then can it be an array with two elements, where the first element is the type and the second element is the map of stuff, or something like that? I don't know. So I'm not the CPOR expert as what the most efficient encoding is, but the point is, if type is not optional and will always appear in every possible message, then you don't have to include the label inside the message, and you can get more bytes out of it.
You could do that. What I
don't know is if it increases your code size to do parsing, which way is better. So,
well, to me, it looked easier to just use the map and do it that way. But Akira, you've been implementing this as well. So what's actually, Dave, you started as well.
I did too, but when I did my implementation at the Berlin hackathon, I was just using an array of fields in a particular sequence because there was no labels, right? And so I was assuming that everything was mandatory in the first implementation that I was doing, because I didn't have enough information to do a map, and so I just did an array with no labels.
Okay.
Yeah. So conventionally, it's easier to in implementation to take mandatory fields out of an array, because in a map they may be anywhere. So somebody could send the type last, and so you cannot really process anything else of the message before you have seen that type. I think Dave's approach is actually a good one. The other observation I have is that the content of the table, in particular the third column, really is in this CDDL. So I'm not sure how much we win from having it in the table here, but I haven't really read the document in detail yet, so that comment may be mistaken.
Yeah, I took it from, as I said, like from the CWD support. That was sort of an accepted approach.
Yes, third column. I agree. It's good to have the third column information in the CDDL format, but right now in the TEEP protocol, the type for the label name is not written in the CDDL message. So that's why probably it's in this chart.
Should be.
So my optimized version of the TEEP message suggestion in the mailing list today is I wrote the type inside a TEEP message CDDL format.
Right. Actually, we can. It's probably a good time to switch over to that issue. To just see how that looks like, because I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. If you switch over to the issues on the other tab, and the topmost one, 21. Yeah, Akira, maybe you want to talk about your proposal yourself. I think it looks.
I can't get it all in one page, but.
Yeah. Yes. There's no sentence. It's just CDDL description here is just my reverse writing from my binary, writing my on my notes from the hackathon. So because from the binary format, it's meant to be compact and doesn't have all the information like a label name is disappeared, and reversing to the text format in the CDO took me a while. But so one of the changes is I wanted to for the implementation perspective, wanted to know each member in the map or array wanted to know what is the type. So I add the type inside of the description. And then next thing I wrote was what if it's going to be the member label name is not going to be a byte string, then I would like to use the number and integer. And if it's and most of the message, the member is not going to exceed 255 number. So it's 1 byte should be sufficient. So I try to put the number in 1 byte, even for the query message, query response, query request, query response, install, and the response reply is success or error and stuff. And yes, so it's more like a clarify for the implementation perspective, and also it will reducing the size by eliminating any of the having unnecessary byte string from the TEEP binary. Of course, the nouns we discussed earlier going to be byte string from 8 byte to 64 byte. That's going to be byte string, but other than that, yes, try to use regular integer for which is for the computer CPU is easier to compare and match. So that's the summary.
I think thanks a lot, Kira, for putting that together. I think that's very good, and we should fold that into the specification, like modifying the table that we talked about earlier, and then taking the data types out, moving them in here. I think is more compact.
And I also wrote every single type, how much specifying the size of the type.
Yeah, I've seen that. I like that too. So if you scroll down a little bit, I think we can see that. Yeah. So for example, here the type is a uint size 1. I think that's good. We talked about the token already, and the non. You copy that over from what we talked on the mailing list about the EAT stuff and so on. So I think to me that this looks very good.
And and after this, without going to hit the nouns binary string, it's before before the encryption or signing, then it's less than 32 byte or less than 40 bytes. So yeah. Before the JSON, it was sometimes was more than 1,500 bytes. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That issue done. I think we should then look at some of the other issues, and obviously lots of them. Dave, who is MCD 500? Who is that?
That's me.
Okay. Thank you. Do you want to talk about select something from there as well, since you filed a couple of issues?
I don't remember what I filed.
I remember the 2 that I filed.
Well, maybe we start with those then.
Okay, go to number 2 then, the very bottom one. So
Which one? The TAM
requested components.
requested components.
Requested
Say
components. Requested components. So this one came up at the Berlin hackathon because we had previously added this into the OTRP spec, but had not been added into the TEEP protocol spec. And so the TEEP architecture talks about passing the list of requested TAs. So you have, say, an installer program that says, I would like to install, or I have a dependency on the following TA. And so the TAM may have a whole bunch of authorized ones, but whether something needs to be installed or not may depend on whether there's some dependency on it. So it might have 100 that would be okay, but it only wants to take the space of installing the ones that are actually needed. And so this would be a way of passing the set of things that are potentially needed, and the TAM can decide whether it's authorized. And so that's what's going on here in the architecture document. But in the query response that comes back from the device, there was no field for passing in the set of requested TAs, only the set of ones that are already installed. And so, as I mentioned, we'd added it into OTRP. And so this is to say we need the same thing in the TEEP protocol. So another field in the list of TAs, just like you have a list of TAs installed, we need another thing in there to add the list of TAs desired. So here, there's not a specific proposal to add it in, but that would go into that same CDDL that we were just looking at next to where the list of installed TAs would be as another field.
So, Dave, are you saying, like, would that go into the trusted app install message and saying, okay,
No, this is in the query response. So
it would be in a query response.
In a curious CDDL that we just we're looking at, right? There was like the query request and so on. So this is, the TAM says, hey, please, TEEP agent, please give me your state. So the TEEP agent gives it back. Oh, and by the way, here's my state. Here's the TAs I've installed. And then here's a list of TAs that I don't have installed, that I have dependencies on, that things would use them if you would install them.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We don't have that. Yeah.
Correct. And so this is just noting that we need to add that in for consistency with what we did in OTRP.
Okay. Yeah.
It wasn't there in OTRP either. Like, I don't think it's in there in the global platform version, but we did put it in based on the discussions that Ming and I had at previous hackathons and so on. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what that one is. All right. We can go on to the other one then, unless there's any comments on that one. And then so you go into the
caching.
Yeah, that's the one. This is the one that I mentioned that we filed from the transport spec to say the transport had this change, but the TEEP spec, the TEEP protocol itself was missing the same discussion. So this is to say that the TEEP agent can cache, the OCSP data such that, so this is the protocol changes. You have to allow for the case that you can send a query response without having received the initial query request, right? So in other words, pretend that you got a query request with all the bits set for things that you might want, and you can just go ahead and send that query response in the very first message, okay? It doesn't allow for that right now in the TEEP protocol spec, and that's what we did in OTRP, is to allow for that, which gets rid of an extra round trip. If you already have it cached, right? So the very first time, if you have a cold cache or the TAM certificate is expired or whatever else, then, or you flushed your cache, then of course you can just reach out and do the normal thing and connect, wait for it to send you the query request. Then you've got the TAM certificate you can encrypt your query response with, right? But if you can cache the thing, that you don't have to wait for that certificate.
Right. This is related to that TEEP agent initiated call, right? So
Exactly.
the discussion was that can we avoid to contact time first?
Exactly.
So TEEP agent local, but so we don't want to send data if we don't know time we can trust. How do you know that? So that's more for future round trip. If you already have that one, then local install or whatever, call TEEP broker to TEEP agent, okay, initiate from there, avoiding one round trip.
Yep, exactly. So I think we, at least Ming and I, know what needs to be said in the document, and this is just a track that we need to write that text and put it in for consistency with what we've already discussed.
Sounds cool. Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything else we have to discuss on that one, so that's the end of the two issues that I filed.
So are you going to create two PRs to add one for this and one for the other topic that we talked about?
Yep, that's my plan.
Cool. Thanks. Akira, do you want to discuss one of your issues?
Yes, one is very easy one. From the second one from the bottom, the TID, does TEEP device have to match all member? This is, I think it's already resolved. This was also, I think it was discussed in OTRP when matching from sending the TA ID from the TAM to the device, or there will be vendor ID and class ID and device ID. And I think this was end up only having some byte string that only will be called TA ID and not with all this vendor ID, class ID, and the device ID. I think this will be in the suit manifest, but in the TEEP protocol, I think it was end up having discussion some in some hackathon or IETF in the past.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, I think we talked about this at the Berlin hackathon, and I think you're right to carry that this was already resolved as what should be done. I don't know if the current draft does it, but I think it was all agreement at the Berlin hackathon as to what the answer was.
Yeah, I think we back then we said that the device ID would indeed be something that we don't necessarily need. The class ID is something we talked about this in the context of the OptE, which uses the UID.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, Akira, because you did the hackathon report at the February interim from that meeting, and I thought that you actually had a slide on this that we talked about in the February interim as your hackathon report. Or I did, or something, I don't remember, but I know it was in that time frame that was the February entry.
And I think that time we end up using something 16 byte string. UID or the DLL name or.
Right, we said we wanted to match exactly what OTRP already had, and that one had that TAID, and we said we were just going to match what was in the OTRP spec.
File name for me seems to be very reasonable.
The file name, I think we have to look at what the existing operating systems in the TEs actually do, and I have to.
Okay, now I'm starting to refresh my memory. As I recall the discussion, and this is from memory, but you've not hit enough keywords I remember, that there was a unique identifier that was outside of the suit manifest, and like a TAID, which could be a UUID or whatever it was. It just had to be some unique identifier, not three of them, like not vendor class device, but just one thing that was unique. And then all the other details, like where to put it and so on, that's whatever is in the suit manifest, because suit had already solved that. Like file name or discussion, that all that is part of suit manifest, not something we deal with in TEEP.
Yeah, I think we still need to sort of look at how we map this appropriately, because, for example, if the suit manifest says it depends on another TA, then that information needs to be in the manifest itself, wouldn't it be?
Yes, because that was, if you remember a while back, we had a list of TEEP requirements on suit that the TEEP working group prepared and that I presented over into suit on behalf of the TEEP working group. And the suit working group went through them, and Brandon said, yep, already done. Yep, already there. Yep, already there. We'll add that. We'll add that.
Okay. Okay. And maybe
if they have been added yet, I'd have to check. But the point was that Brendan and the suit working group in general agreed that, yep, we will accommodate TEEP's requirements for those.
Yeah, I think we need to double check and put some text into, but I don't think I've addressed this issue yet in a current TEEP protocol draft, so we need to double check that as well.
I don't think it's in the draft yet. Yes.
Yeah, so we have to do that. Yeah.
This looks need more discussion. Link back a suit, right? How to identify TA when we upgrade it, right? We identify that one have new version come in and say identify by the ID unique, that should be fine. Or by the name. The name is not unique, but it may not be unique, so we have not defined that.
Should we go to another pull request? Another issue?
You've got 5.5 minutes left.
Or maybe you maybe we should instead do some planning for the next.
Yeah, well, so the next call is tomorrow, so we can continue tomorrow. I didn't cancel it just in case. So we can continue the discussion of these comments tomorrow, or you could do it over the list and we could set up another virtual interim, you know, at some later point in time. It's up to the group and you.
I think the question is whether there's any issues on here that need direction from the working group for coming up with a proposal on how to address. Because the proposal would be a pull request, right? Is there anything that would need direction before somebody could come up with a pull request?
Admittedly, have not looked at these comments, so.
I'm mostly asking Akira because most of them are his. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, one is the install delete wish from sending a install or delete wish from the client app to the tab.
I agree. That's a good one for us to discuss. That would be worth at least 2 minutes on now.
Yes.
Which one is that? Oh, this one.
Third one from the top.
This one.
Yes. So currently in the message from query response from the device to the tab does not have a member to say client app is expecting to tab to send have the send initiate the install or delete. So, but sometimes device have a client app installed by the vendor or pre-installed, or it's client app installed by other store whatever it's called, and it wants to have the particular TA bind it to the client app to have distribute from the associated tab. So and yes.
So this one, the list of things that would be in the install wish is the same as the issue that I talked about. What's different here is this notion of can the TEEP agent pass a list of TAs for which you would like to delete? That's what's new in this issue beyond what was in the other issue. And that's not something the working group has ever discussed, even in the OTRP context, is should we actually allow the TEEP agent to pass a things for which it no longer has a dependency? Maybe you've now deleted the rich apps that would used to depend on it. And so that's now just kind of hanging out there with nothing that depends on it. It's just consuming space, and it might like to reclaim space, and passing that knowledge from the TEEP agent to the TAM would allow the TAM to say, okay, if there's no dependencies, then I'm okay with going ahead and pushing a delete message on that one. And so that's new, and that's why I said it would be useful to bring this up, because we've never discussed this. But personally, I think this is a good idea. So. Is there anybody who thinks it's not a good idea? Because otherwise, since I was going to do a pull request on how to pass a list of requested stuff, and Akira has a little CDL snippet, then at least between Akira and I think we have enough information to generate a pull request. But since we've never talked about the reason to do this, I just wanted to take a second to elaborate that on the list here on the call here.
Yeah, I think it would be to think a little bit more. I think it would be nice to have more context on about the use case that you have in mind, because, like, for example, I'm having a hard time seeing on how just another field with an unsigned integer provides you that information.
It doesn't. What you need is you need the list of TA IDs. And so in the other issue that I filed, it's here's the list of TA IDs that I would like to install, that I have dependencies on, but they're not installed right now. I being the TEEP agent, right? And so Akira is suggesting we might want the same thing of here's I say, here's a list of TAs that are installed that I have, right? Well, here's a list of the TAs that are installed that I no longer have dependencies on, so it would be okay to remove them if you want, right? And so he's saying we should actually have a field in there which is a different list, or maybe it's another way of encoding the same list. And so unless anybody objects, then Akira and we can go ahead and come up with a pull request that does that. But we just wanted to surface this notion that Akira came up with, which I said I agree that this is a good idea. So.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
All right, then I think we're just about at time. So unless there's anything else you want to say, Akira, that's why I said it was a good idea.
I'm fine. Yes, thank you.
Okay, as Dave said, we are just about out of time. So the question for the group is, do you believe we need to meet tomorrow?
I don't think so. I think we need to work on the items, and we could schedule another call in, let's say, a month from now, and see what the status is and how we make progress with the implementations as well.
Okay.
I agree. I don't see a reason to meet tomorrow.
Okay, so I'll send out a cancellation, and then maybe I'll put a question to the group. Maybe have the meeting 5 weeks out, something like that.
Sounds good.
I think it partly depends on if you're going to start a working group last call on one of the documents, or a second working group last call, then when would that complete? And so we should line that up with that timeline. So if you don't decide right now, you might want to decide like shortly thereafter and post it.
Let me decide that based on the working group last calls. Well, on the results. So we're kind of gated on TEEP and a couple of other items. So, but in the interest of time, I will cancel tomorrow's call, and then we'll set up another interim whenever we think is about the right window.
But for the architecture document, I think the decision today was to start the second working group last call at like any time now, like today it was.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's just the one on the transport. We said what the timeline. Anyway, I'll leave that to the chairs to figure out. So.
Yeah. On that one, we're gated. Okay. So Terry and I will get together. We'll send out the email for the action items, I think, just to make it all clear. But the thing that is clear, there's no call tomorrow. That one I'll try and send out right away. All right.
Thanks a lot.
All right. With that, thank you, everyone. Last mention for those who didn't, please put your names, if you haven't already, on the virtual blue sheets, which is at the bottom of the Etherpad. All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.